Welcome back to the deep dive.
And we have a mountain of material to get through today.
We really do. Our mission is straightforward, but it's heavy. We've got this extraordinary stack of material transcripts, detailed operational accounts, deep analyses.
And together they really paint a picture of a world that is just undergoing these huge seismic changes.
Exactly. This isn't just one story. It's more like a tapestry, woven with escalating geopolitical conflict, the shadowy inner workings of intelligence ops.
And this quiet, almost invisible technological revolution that is actively dismantling the global financial order as we know it.
So the goal, as always, is to cut through all that noise, all that information, and give you the crucial distilled insights. We want to make sure you are thoroughly well-informed on the dramatic shifts that are really defining this new year, 2026.
Yeah, exactly. When you look at the entirety of the information, two powerful, almost contradictory trends seem to emerge. On one hand, you have the immediate visible conflict, an escalating risk of hybrid war, and this profound weaponization of information right on the battlefront.
And on the other hand,
you have these fundamental, almost invisible, technological and economic realignments happening at the same time, far away from the headlines. Our job is to really rigorously analyze how these threads...
the lack of political accountability, the intelligence operations.
Yeah, exactly. How all that and the future of global financial dominance are all intricately connected, and maybe most importantly, what the implications are for you.
Okay, let's unpack this enormous file. And I think we have to start with the most immediate headline, the one that really closed out last year on a dramatic note.
The drone attack.
The highly contested drone attack claims. And what they reveal not just about the state of a major conflict, but about how information itself is now maybe the primary theater of war.
That's the perfect way to put it.
So let's delve right into the mechanics of that alleged drone strike. It happened just before Christmas 2025.
Right. And the initial report suggested that the drones were specifically targeting the residence of a senior Russian leader.
The timing alone was incredibly provocative. It coincided precisely with the Ukrainian president meeting a former U.S. president for these, high-level talks.
It felt calculated. It had to be. Either to completely derail diplomacy or to send this unmistakably aggressive message.
And that precision and timing immediately creates this fog of competing narratives.
A profound conflict in narrative. The official responses generated, three fundamentally contradictory accounts. First, you have the Russian claim.
Which was?
Drones explicitly targeted the residents. And, crucially, they claimed they recovered targeting data from the shot-down drones that confirmed that specific flight path.
And their leadership, people like Lavrov, were immediately promising retaliation.
Explicit and proportional retaliation. That was the phrase they used.
Okay, so that's narrative one. Then, of course, you have the necessary denial from Ukraine.
But that denial was immediately complicated by U.S. intelligence.
And that's where the fog really rolls in.
It does. A U.S. intelligence report, and the material suggests it came from the CIA, put out a different story. It claimed the drones were actually aimed at a large Russian military base nearby, not the leader's residence.
So their contention, whether they say it outright or not, is that Russia is using this for propaganda.
Exactly. That Russia is using the claim of targeting the leader as outright disinformation. The goal, according to that U.S. briefing, was to create internal justification for more aggression and to shore up domestic political support by painting the West as dangerously unhinged.
So the core takeaway here, and this is what's so fascinating, is that the material truth, whether the drone was aimed at the residence or the base, it almost becomes irrelevant to the geopolitical calculation.
Absolutely. The irrelevance of the truth is the core insight. Every side, based on these accounts, is now willing to deploy disinformation, whether it's through outright lies or, selective leaks.
And it's not even about deceiving the enemy anymore, is it?
Not primarily. It's about justifying future actions and bolstering domestic compliance. If Russia's lying, it justifies their aggression to their own people. If the U.S. and Ukraine are lying, it masks their escalation. The result is this profound systemic distrust that is then used as an offensive weapon.
That distrust then acts as a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Precisely. That profound sense of distrust is leveraged by both sides to compel action. Ukraine uses the narrative true or not to cast Russia as an untrustworthy negotiating partner, which justifies not pursuing a negotiated peace.
And Russia does the same.
Russia uses the targeting claim, whether it's true or not, to convince their population that, quote, the West is fundamentally aggressive and willing to risk total conflict. That justifies the need to go all in and win on the ground.
So you're looking at a system where the allegation itself and the paranoia that comes with it is actually more effective at compelling action than actual military strategy.
The lack of a shared reality becomes a strategic advantage for anyone who wants escalation.
So, given this atmosphere of just profound distrust, let's look at the military and political reality on the ground. The material we have suggests that despite all this political intrigue, the military situation itself continues to shift, and pretty dramatically, against the Ukrainian side.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the broader context, we have to look at the negotiation stalemate. We've heard claims repeated for over a year now by both Ukrainian and U.S. representatives
That they're almost there.
that 90% or even 95% of the negotiation points for a final treaty have been agreed upon since the conflict began.
Which sounds like a diplomatic breakthrough is just around the corner.
It sounds that way, but the devil is entirely in that remaining 5 to 10%.
And that small fraction contains the entire fate of the war. What exactly are those final, non-negotiable points?
The sticking points have consistently boiled down to two areas. One was security guarantees, which, some reports suggested were actually nearing a viable, if complex, solution.
But the other one?
The other one, the absolute core remaining issue, is territorial concessions.
Right.
Russia's position, as reported in the transcripts, is an uncompromising red line. They demand the administrative borders of all 4 regions they claim: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson.
And on the other side, the Ukrainian president has stated that giving up the rest of the Donbas, the territory Russia doesn't even physically control yet, is a red line for him and the nation.
So you have an unresolvable diplomatic paradox.
Especially when you consider how much the Russian position seems to have hardened based on the most recent accounts.
That is the most alarming development in the material from late last year. We have these accounts describing the Russian president reportedly speaking in full military uniform to his top commanders.
And what did he say?
That his patience is exhausted, that his interest in diplomatic negotiation is now, and this is a quote, close to zero. The phrase used was that they will either have peace on their explicit terms or they will simply take what they need by force.
Wow. That's a profound strategic shift.
It is. It indicates the war is no longer primarily about demilitarization or neutrality. It is fully transitioned into a campaign purely aimed at seizing and holding specific territories, achieving a military victory on the ground that just makes all those negotiation points moot.
Which brings us to the question of pacing. Western analysts for a long time suggested that capturing the remaining Donbas territory could take, a grinding 2 to 5 years.
A very linear projection.
So why is that specific time-based view proving to be so flawed? What critical factor are those analysts missing in their models?
This is where we need to dive into the mechanics of attrition. The failure of those linear time-based analyses comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of Russia's primary goal.
Which isn't just about land.
Exactly. Many analysts look at a map, at geography, and they just project forward. They fail to recognize that for Russia, taking territory is often a secondary objective.
The primary goal being?
The absolute primary goal is the systematic destruction and exhaustion of the Ukrainian armed forces. It's a slow, methodical war of attrition designed to maximize personnel and material depletion on the other side.
And the information we have suggests this attrition isn't happening at a steady pace. It's accelerating. Maybe exponentially.
The acceleration data is compelling evidence of this strategy succeeding. Russia reportedly seized about 4,000 square kilometers in 2024.
Okay.
But that rate jumped significantly to approximately 6,600 square kilometers in 2025. It's not a linear progression, it's getting faster.
So why the acceleration? What's the mechanism?
It's the manpower disparity hitting a critical mass. Ukrainian troop losses, from casualties, desertion, internal displacement, they're rapidly depleting the available pool of troops capable of fighting. This forces them into constant demobilization of older, less trained soldiers who can't be rotated effectively.
So the quality of the defense itself is degrading as the quantity of the force shrinks.
Exactly. The defense is being stretched thin. It means troops can't be rotated out for rest, for training, for re-equipment. Their ability to reconstitute new, effective fighting units is severely hampered.
And on the other side?
Conversely, the reports indicate Russia has a dramatically larger pool of manpower, numbering in the millions, that's available through recruitment, without yet having to resort to Mass forced mobilization.
So this constant asymmetric attrition is designed to just shrink the Ukrainian forces until the whole structure breaks.
Until the stability of their cohesive defense structure finally breaks, yeah.
Okay, but if the data supporting this attrition and the manpower disparity is so clear, why were Western analysts still projecting 2 to 5 years? I mean, what specific bias leads them to misread the data so profoundly?
That's a crucial question. The analysis suggests a bias rooted in what you might call optimistic military analysis.
What does that mean?
They often project stability based on Western doctrine. So they assume high retention rates, robust supply chains, consistent morale. They fail to model the cascading effect of a systemic collapse.
They're focused too much on the front line.
And not enough on the strategic reserves and the logistics infrastructure behind it. Once that fabric of the defense shatters, that's the point where exhausted and depleted units just can't fill the gaps anymore. The slow, grinding war instantaneously turns into a rapid breakthrough.
Are there historical examples of this?
Of course. Think of the collapse of France in 1940, a slow defense that suddenly just evaporates, allowing for massive rapid advances.
And if that breaking point is reached in 2026, what do the accounts suggest is the likely military objective?
The analysis points to the high possibility of this acceleration continuing, allowing for a rapid advance, potentially up to the Dnieper River, before the end of this year, 2026.
Which would mean seizing major strategic areas.
Like Zaporizhzhia in the south and Kupiansk in the north. The grim underlying theory is that if a military force is reduced solely to plain defense, it can only lose slower. Until a plausible, large-scale plan exists to stop and reverse the Russian advance and fix the manpower issue, the attrition will continue until the defense structure collapses entirely.
That is a very grim analysis of the conflict's pace. We absolutely have to address the ultimate escalation risk. Russia recently showed off its nuclear-capable arsenic missiles publicly in Belarus.
Hypersonic, yeah. Reportedly traveling 10 times the speed of sound, capable of carrying 6 warheads each.
The question everyone is asking is, are these now considered available for use in the ongoing ground conflict?
I think context and utility are everything here. These missiles, they're newly produced, they showcase this advanced capability, specifically that hypersonic speed which makes interception nearly impossible.
So they're a strategic asset.
They are highly likely reserved for a critical, decisive moment. They're not necessary for the current ground operations which are already succeeding through conventional means. They're considered an escalation reserve.
Meaning they're for the highest stakes scenario.
A direct kinetic military strike between NATO and Russia. That's what they're for.
So they serve primarily as a deterrent then, rather than a frontline weapon.
Precisely. They communicate a specific red line to Western powers. And that line is being more and more clearly defined. Russian officials, including Lavrov, have been utterly clear. If a coalition of the willing, like France or other NATO states, places any Western ground troops in Ukraine,
they become targets.
Those troops would immediately be deemed legitimate targets. This links back directly to those drone attack claims.
Right. Following the alleged targeting of the leader's residence, Russian officials said that targets and timing for specific retaliatory strikes had been set. What might those strikes actually look like? What's the calculus for a proportional response?
Well, Russia has generally demonstrated a pretty careful calculus, avoiding immediate maximum escalation that could trigger Article 5.
Yeah.
But they have to act to satisfy domestic pressure.
So what are the options?
Based on previous actions, retaliation could involve strikes against previously untouched strategic areas like power ministries and government infrastructure inside Kyiv, or infrastructure in Odessa to further cripple Ukraine's sea access.
And what about targeting individuals?
There's also the possibility of targeting mid to lower tier Ukrainian leaders involved in recent offensives. But they will likely avoid immediate top-level strikes to maintain some degree of control over that escalation ladder.
We also have to consider the risk of hybrid warfare blowback, because Russia sees this as a proxy war involving 50 nations supplying lethal aid. That puts every single one of those supplier nations at risk.
This is a major concern now echoing across Europe, particularly in Germany, the UK, and France. Russia fundamentally believes that since 50 nations are supplying capabilities to kill Russian soldiers, including long-range missiles and intelligence, they are justified in taking proportional action.
Against those supplier nations outside of Ukraine.
Exactly. Escalation in this view guarantees a response. This means increased actions that fall just short of traditional warfare. Strategic sabotage targeting crucial logistics.
Like what?
Rail lines, moving equipment, ammunition depots, or factories in the West that are manufacturing critical components. And of course, sophisticated cyber attacks against the supplier's infrastructure. As the conflict intensifies on the ground, Western nations have to prepare for a significant proportional blowback designed to cripple that supply chain of lethal aid.
It's a terrifying feedback loop where aggression just guarantees counter-aggression.
It is.
Okay, let's shift now from the dynamics of the battlefield to the shadow governments operating behind the scenes. Specifically, let's focus on the internal dynamics of U.S. power, intelligence operations, and systemic political scandal. We have accounts detailing U.S. intelligence activities that seem to fly directly in the face of stated presidential policy.
Yeah, specifically the CIA orchestration of Ukrainian drone strikes on critical Russian infrastructure.
Not just on the front lines, we're talking oil refineries, gas facilities, and even oil tankers operating way out in the Mediterranean.
This brings that central issue of the deep state, the professional bureaucracy and intelligence apparatus that often operates independently of elected officials, into really sharp relief.
And the paradox here is glaring.
It is. The former U.S. president reportedly greenlit these drone strikes, while at the same time outwardly affirming the need for peace and mediating negotiations, like that meeting he held right before the most recent drone attack claims.
So how do we reconcile those conflicting agendas? Is this a deliberate dual strategy? Or is the president genuinely unaware of the specifics of these operations, like targeting an oil tanker in the Mediterranean?
The accounts we've seen suggest three possible scenarios for this duplicitous activity, and they're all rooted in the institutional power of the intelligence community.
What's the first one?
First, the president could be getting the notorious mushroom treatment, being deliberately kept in the dark and fed only sanitized details, while the bureaucracy proceeds with its own deeply entrenched agenda.
Plausible. What's number two?
Second, he could be playing a conscious, duplicitous game, fully aware of the operations but maintaining plausible deniability to distance himself legally and politically from direct acts of war.
And the third, which sounds more structural.
Third, and this is maybe the most important one, is bureaucratic inertia. The CIA is often driven by its own deep-seated professional and, let's be honest, financial investment in these conflicts. Once operations are set in motion, they often continue and even escalate, flying directly in the face of stated diplomacy, regardless of which way the elected leader is leaning.
This inherent conflict feeds directly into a highly criticized, simplistic, but pervasive element of U.S. foreign policy: the myth of the key man.
Oh, that concept. It's been rampant in U.S. foreign policy since the Cold War. It operates under this dangerous, simplistic notion that assassinating a single leader, say the Russian president, will solve a complex geopolitical problem.
It's a profound institutional failure.
It is. History demonstrates the exact opposite. The removal of figures like Diem in Vietnam, Noriega in Panama, Gaddafi in Libya, or Hussein in Iraq. It consistently led not to stability, but to worse outcomes, to power vacuums filled by more aggressive, less restrained factions.
And the specific risk in this conflict is catastrophic.
Consequentially, killing the current Russian leader, who is frequently criticized inside Russia for being too cautious and accommodating to the West, could easily result in a catastrophic outcome.
Who would likely replace him?
Accounts suggest a likely replacement would be a more hawkish, passionate, and aggressive figure like Dmitry Medvedev, who has already spoken openly about using tactical nuclear weapons.
So the successful removal of the current leader could immediately trigger an escalation leading to a direct, tactical nuclear exchange with the U.S.
It's not just a stupid philosophy. It's an existential risk.
And the consequence of the CIA allegedly greenlighting that operation near the Russian leader's residence, regardless of what the intended target was.
Russia views that proximity and the intelligence backing of the strike as an overt act of war. The U.S. intelligence community claimed the target was only a military facility nearby, but they only knew that detail because they were involved in the planning and execution.
And Russia claims to have proof.
They do. Russia reportedly recovered electronic components containing the exact flight path and targeting information, which they allegedly turned over to the U.S. defense attaché in Moscow as proof of direct foreign involvement. This prompts very real fears of aggressive Russian retaliation, specifically targeting U.S. and British intelligence operatives involved in these sensitive, covert operations. The threshold for what constitutes an act of war is constantly being lowered.
Let's move to another facet of this economic and military pressure. Ukraine has adopted a new strategy of targeting Russia's shadow fleet vessels, which are crucial for maintaining the flow of oil revenue.
Right. And some initially hoped this strategy would be the Achilles heel that cripples the Russian front line.
Is it working?
The information we have suggests emphatically that this is not a decisive strategy. You have to look at the scale. Russia's shadow fleet is conservatively estimated to consist of between 900 and 1,300 vessels.
So interdicting or destroying 4 vessels, while it's tactically impactful,
It's strategically non-decisive. Russia, anticipating these pressures, has spent the last 4 years minimizing its reliance on vulnerable sea transport routes, diversifying land routes, and strengthening internal financial mechanisms.
but the reports did state that these strikes cost Moscow an estimated $75 million a day. Isn't that number itself a strong indicator of economic impact, regardless of the ultimate military outcome?
It is a substantial cost, certainly, but we have to look at whether it's an existential cost.
And it's not.
Russia's state finances are currently robust enough to absorb the temporary loss of a few vessels and the required insurance premium hikes. The expectation that economic warfare or strikes against the fleet will somehow decisively affect the Russian front line is illogical, especially when you look at the conflict's history.
Right, the same thing has happened on the other side.
Exactly. Similar infrastructure targeting on the Ukrainian side, the destruction of power grids and oil refining capacity, did not result in Ukraine's defeat. Economic warfare causes pain, but it rarely changes the outcome of a grinding war of attrition, particularly when the target state has robust internal controls and diversified trading partners.
Now we have to turn inward to domestic political turbulence, where the deep state and the shadow of personal scandal intersect at the very top of U.S. power. We have detailed accounts regarding the intense focus on the Epstein matter, particularly its long-standing decade-plus connection to powerful U.S. political figures.
This is where we examine the sheer decades-long scale of the sleaze and entitlement that existed in those high-flying elite circles. The accounts detail a long-standing deep bond between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, dating back over 10 years.
And the relationship was centered on what?
Centered, as the material states, clearly over women and sex. This was not a casual or peripheral relationship. It was, for a time, deeply personal and transactional.
And the specifics of this alleged friendship paint a disturbing picture of their activities, particularly during the late 90s and early 2000s in places like Palm Beach and Atlantic City.
Yes, the reports are extremely vivid and specific, illustrating a profound mutual disregard for ethical boundaries. There are detailed descriptions of the former president around Epstein's pool, with girls who were described as certainly young during that period.
And Epstein allegedly told stories about him.
He did. Epstein allegedly recounted stories of the former president boasting that the thing that made life worth living was sleeping with his friends' wives.
And there was that routine they allegedly shared in Atlantic City to target couples, which is especially indicative of their dynamic.
It's a chilling detail that really underscores their shared predatory philosophy. They reportedly had a routine when targeting couples in Atlantic City casinos. The former president would engage the woman in conversation, offering flattery and attention.
While Epstein distracted the husband.
Exactly. Epstein would engage the man in a discussion about finance or some deal. The goal was to successfully separate the couple. This paints a picture of a shared life of entitled depravity that some observers contend should have been grounds for complete political disqualification decades ago.
So, given that deep bond, what caused the dramatic, permanent falling out between them?
The relationship ended in 2004, and it wasn't over morality. It was over property, specifically a bidding war for a Palm Beach mansion.
What happened?
Epstein wanted the property and even brought the former president to see it, asking for advice on moving a swimming pool. The former president then reportedly went behind Epstein's back and bid $40 million for the property, believing he was the top bidder.
And Epstein believed Trump then went to the police.
He became absolutely convinced of it, that it was the former president who subsequently tipped off the police, initiating the long legal journey that would ultimately lead to Epstein's 2019 arrest and death.
That's a profound shift from deep friendship to property dispute and then the accusation of initiating a criminal investigation.
It is. And despite the enmity that followed, the accounts state that Epstein remained obsessed with and discussed the former president frequently. And curiously, he maintained close contacts within his circle, like Tom Barrack.
But that obsession later turned to fear.
It did. As the former president neared the presidency, the obsession shifted into real, palpable fear.
And then when Epstein was arrested in 2019, it was by the former president's own Justice Department.
Correct. That arrest, followed by his highly suspicious death in federal prison, a death described in the transcripts as one of the most suspicious events in modern federal penal history, it just fueled intense and lasting speculation.
The theory being he was killed to keep him quiet.
The prevailing theory is that he was killed to prevent him from providing dirt on powerful figures. The material notes that Steve Bannon, a figure who had fallen out with the former president but maintained contact with Epstein, was reportedly the only person the former president genuinely feared during the 2016 campaign due to Bannon's deep knowledge of the intricacies of that relationship.
That level of intrigue and the shadow of a high-stakes cover-up carries directly into another major controversy we have information on. The alleged assassination of the high-profile conservative figure Charlie Kirk in September 2025.
The reports surrounding the Kirk incident are highly specific, and they immediately raise red flags, casting intense suspicion on the charged suspect and the official narrative. The skepticism is rooted in numerous operational failures that suggest a cover-up or a professional plot, rather than just some random act.
What are the key points that observers are latching onto as evidence of operational failure?
It really centers on the alleged complete failure of Kirk's security team to follow standard professional protocol for a high-profile figure at a public event.
Like what, specifically?
Well, they reportedly failed to check the roofs of nearby buildings for threats. They neglected to use drones for high-angle surveillance of the perimeter, which is mandatory for many large events.
And after the shooting?
Most disturbingly, they failed to administer immediate first aid, and there was no ambulance on standby, which is professional protocol for managing a target of a high-level threat. On top of all that, key figures who claimed to have knowledge of a credible threat against Kirk weeks before the incident were reportedly never contacted by the FBI.
That accumulation of failures, neglecting aerial surveillance, not checking high ground, failing basic trauma care, that suggests professional negligence at best.
Or something much more sinister. That's the contention of the critics. They argue these are not the mistakes of an amateur security team, they are operational failures that suggest a professional force either deliberately stood down or was compromised.
And the official investigation is being called a cover-up.
It is. It's described not as an inquiry, but as a deliberate cover-up, allegedly being spearheaded by a key figure, Kash Patel. And the core reason for this intense suppression of information, according to some of the most serious allegations, links back, astonishingly, to the Epstein matter and implicates a foreign government, Israel.
Okay, walk us through that highly charged, alleged connection. How does the suppression of the Epstein client list tie into foreign government involvement?
The central claim is that Epstein allegedly ran a highly sophisticated blackmail operation. It involved the systematic videotaping of powerful U.S. and international people in compromising situations with underage women.
And this compromising information was then weaponized.
Potentially used to compel compliance with that foreign government's strategic requests and policies, thus influencing U.S. foreign and domestic policy.
So the Epstein client list is suppressed not because of domestic political figures, but because a foreign power is allegedly implicated in weaponizing that material for influence.
That is the allegation.
Yeah.
The suppression is aimed at protecting the operational capacity of the blackmail ring and the foreign interests it serves. And this perspective is being argued by prominent conservative commentators who contend that Israel is, in fact, not a strategic ally, but a significant liability to the U.S.
What's their argument?
It's structural. The U.S. is inextricably tied to the conflict through massive, unprecedented aid packages and through propaganda that links American destiny directly to Israel's. This forces the U.S. to comply with policies that critics argue run counter to American strategic interests.
So this whole Nexus Epstein, the alleged cover-up, the security failures, it raises this profound question.
To what extent was Epstein running a long-term foreign intelligence operation on U.S. soil, and who is actively working to ensure the truth never sees the light of day?
Okay, let's zoom out from these specific scandals to a systemic analysis of corporate influence and the nature of modern capitalism itself. The accounts we have describe how unchecked militarism, far beyond the military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned of, has fundamentally deformed American society and the American economy.
The scale is, it's almost impossible to get your head around.
Yeah.
The U.S. spends nearly $1 trillion annually on its military.
$1 trillion.
A figure that often exceeds the combined military spending of the next 8 largest countries. And critically, more than half of that taxpayer money goes directly to contractors.
So we're talking about companies like Lockheed Martin.
Exactly, who reliably receives $40 to $50 billion annually. This structure is the military-industrial complex 2.0.
And this complex ensures its own survival, disconnected from actual strategic military needs.
It's a self-perpetuating apparatus. It guarantees loyalty and continuous contract flow, even for systems that are deeply flawed, redundant, or entirely unnecessary, like the troubled F-35 fighter jet program or the next generation of expensive ICBMs.
And it's sustained through the revolving door.
The relentless revolving door, where former Pentagon and government officials instantly become high-paid lobbyists for the very defense companies they once regulated. They then fund think tanks that consistently promote an ideology of American exceptionalism and perpetual dominance, which just justifies the endless spending.
What's new here, and maybe more ideologically aggressive than the traditional defense contractor, is the push coming from Silicon Valley.
This is a major structural shift. Ideological entrepreneurs like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are aggressively pushing for the mass colonization and, critically, the militarization of space.
They're not traditional defense contractors.
No, they're peddling high-tech fantasies and are described in some circles as even more ideological and warmongering than the established aerospace companies. Their objective, according to manifestos like Arsenal Democracy 2.0, is to focus the U.S. on a single, unifying national mission, applying cutting-edge AI exclusively to weapons development.
So the military-industrial complex is becoming the military-tech ideological complex.
That's a good way to put it.
But the result of this spending frenzy often prioritizes profit and continuous contracts over actual effectiveness, leading to profoundly flawed weapon systems.
We have glaring examples of this systemic failure. You can look at the $13 billion aircraft carriers, which many strategists believe are increasingly vulnerable to modern hypersonic missiles.
Or the littoral combat ship.
The infamous littoral combat ship, a project acknowledged by the Navy as strategically useless, but which remained alive for years, purely through pork barrel politics designed to sustain contracts. Even in current conflicts, the economic absurdity is shocking. They're using highly expensive $2 million missiles to counteract modestly invested commercial-grade drones, like the ones used in the Houthi engagement.
It's a system that values spending over strategy.
It values continuous, massive expenditure more than strategic efficacy or economic sustainability.
And beyond the budget line, what is the cost of this unchecked militarism to American society itself?
This unchecked spending and obsessive focus on military technology acts like a vacuum cleaner for the nation's most valuable asset, its talent. It sucks up the best scientists, engineers, and researchers, diverting them from existential domestic crises.
People who could be working on climate change or infrastructure.
Exactly. Climate change adaptation, rebuilding crumbling infrastructure, creating affordable healthcare systems, developing sustainable energy. By systematically prioritizing weapons production and these global domination fantasies, the country is weakening itself from within. It's fulfilling the historical pattern described by Arnold Toynbee, that militarism inevitably disembowels a civilization.
Expanding this structural critique, let's look at the perverse incentives of modern capitalism more broadly. How does this system actively limit the very innovation and social good that its proponents claim to champion?
The function of modern corporate strategy is, well, it's monolithic. The singular purpose of production is to maximize and accumulate profit. It is not to genuinely meet human needs or achieve necessary ecological goals.
And this imperative results in perverse forms of production.
Profoundly perverse.
Mm-hmm.
Massive capital investments flow exclusively into things profitable to capital. Oversized SUVs, disposable fast fashion luxury mansions, private jets, and feeding the military-industrial complex.
And the logical result is a chronic, artificial shortage of necessary goods and services despite our advanced technological capability.
Precisely. We see chronic shortages of affordable housing, efficient public transit, and scalable renewable energy systems, even though the technological capacity to build all these things exists abundantly.
So this creates what the accounts call the double crisis.
The double crisis we're living through.
Right.
An ecological crisis driven by massive, unnecessary overproduction that constantly overshoots planetary boundaries, juxtaposed against massive social deprivation. We are talking about 100 million people in the USA and Europe who live in measurable food insecurity, 5 billion globally who lack necessary healthcare.
It's a paradox.
The wealthiest, most technologically advanced countries in the world cannot guarantee basic food security or shelter for significant portions of their citizenry.
And to keep this machine running, companies employ a sophisticated psychological strategy to recruit and co-opt idealistic young talent, what the accounts call the corporate charade.
It's a brilliant evolution of recruitment strategy. Corporations like Meta or the major banks, they can't just offer a high salary anymore. They have to sell the idealistic, ambitious new graduate on the idea that by joining them, you are actually changing the world.
They've co-opted the very idea of change.
They have. They frame working outside the system for a local nonprofit or community-driven initiative as inherently less impactful. The insidious argument goes, what are you going to do? Help 10 people locally. Come to Meta and we will give you the resources and scale to transform education for 1 billion people.
So the most ambitious, idealistic talent gets channeled to work within the very system that created the problems.
Exactly. It frames true systemic change as something only achievable using the vast, privileged resources of the current elite structure.
Okay, let's transition to the new battlegrounds of technology and manufacturing, where the AI race between the US and China is dominating strategic thinking.
The U.S. is currently locked in a massive AI investment bubble, and it's driven by market speculation. Record sums were poured into building data centers last year, $61 billion.
But there's a problem.
A big one. The deep-pocketed U.S. tech giants are struggling acutely to monetize their advanced AI models. It's creating a significant monetization gap. They've built these complex, powerful frontier models, but they lack sufficient, proven, cash flow-generating, real-world applications to justify the astronomical investments required to maintain them.
Meanwhile, China appears to have structural and strategic advantages that are allowing them to scale quickly and efficiently.
The China advantage is rooted in pragmatic economics and technological ingenuity. They have cheap, abundant power and benefit from low borrowing rates, allowing them to project an investment of $70 billion this year alone into AI.
And UF chip sanctions are forcing them to be innovative.
Critically, yes. Due to the sanctions, they've focused development on software workarounds. Models like DeepSeek are being engineered to be more efficient, requiring less power and capable of running on less advanced chips. It's a strategic realization. Sheer brute force computing power is being challenged by elegant software efficiency.
So the value isn't in the model itself, but in the application.
The consensus dawning in Silicon Valley is that frontier AI models will rapidly become a commodity. The true lasting value is in highly efficient cash flow positive applications. And that's where Chinese companies are gaining dominance.
And we saw a desperate multi-billion-dollar U.S. corporate move that validated China's unexpected lead in application.
You're talking about the acquisition of Menace AI by Meta.
Right, Facebook.
Meta, feeling severely threatened and lagging behind competitors like Google and OpenAI, acquired this China-founded AI platform for over $1 billion. And the reason was singular. Menace AI offered a working, highly efficient, cash flow positive AI agent product that provided immediate operational efficiency.
It was a panic move.
A clear panic move to instantly acquire a working, monetizable application, reducing Meta's immediate reliance on slower-moving U.S. competitors. It shows the market is prioritizing viable products over frontier promise.
Let's quickly turn to the electric vehicle market, where China's dominance is now, well, it's undeniable.
The shift has been swift and convincing, cementing China's role in global manufacturing. China's BYD officially overtook Tesla deliveries in 2025 by a large margin, making it the world's largest EV maker.
And the competition in China, the biggest market, is brutal.
It is. BYD models are aggressively undercutting Tesla prices. The BYD Seagull, for example, costs less than $10,000. That makes Tesla's cheaper options look prohibitively expensive, especially in a tightening global economy.
This intense competition is being exacerbated by U.S. policy that, in a strange twist of fate, is actively harming its own flagship EV company in that critical market.
That's the unintended consequence of geopolitical protectionism. U.S. restrictions have profoundly backfired, particularly when it comes to autonomous driving. Due to U.S. government prohibitions on the large-scale AI model training of data gathered in China, Tesla cannot train its full self-driving, or FSD, effectively on critical Chinese road data. That data is subject to tough data localization laws.
So their competitors don't have this problem.
Competitors like BYD are seamlessly integrating advanced Chinese AI models like DeepSeek into their systems, advancing their autonomy rapidly. If this regulatory delay persists, Tesla's once pioneering FSD capability could become functionally obsolete in the single largest EV market on the planet.
It's an example of strategic mandates inadvertently undercutting their own corporate champions.
A perfect one.
Okay, this is where the geopolitical, economic, and technological narratives all converge with maximum game-changing impact. We are discussing the quiet, almost stealth revolution that is threatening to dismantle the 50-year US dollar and SWIFT monopoly.
To appreciate the magnitude of this threat, you first have to understand the old system. For decades, the US dollar and the SWIFT messaging system operated as the global toll booth.
Everything had to pass through it.
Every major international transaction, whether you're trading oil, grain, or manufactured goods, had to pass through the U.S. financial system, be routed through New York banks, and ultimately be cleared in U.S. dollars.
Which gave the U.S. extraordinary power.
A God's-eye view of the entire global economy and, critically, the ability to weaponize finance.
And kicking Russia out of SWIFT, the financial nuclear option, was the crucial strategic mistake that instantly accelerated the demand for an alternative. It just exposed the vulnerability of every other nation.
That weaponization was the unambiguous warning flare seen globally by China, by Saudi Arabia, throughout the global south. It told them their money was fundamentally not safe from U.S. political interference or confiscation.
So that threat created demand for an alternative.
It accelerated the demand for a faster, sanctions-proof alternative. That alternative is Project mBridge. This platform, developed under the auspices of the Bank for International Settlements, uses distributed ledger technology DLT, a form of private interbank blockchain, to allow central banks to transact peer-to-peer.
So, if SWIFT was a slow, proprietary messaging service built on 1970s technology, how does the underlying DLT of mBridge fundamentally change the physics of money transfer and settlement?
mBridge destroys the friction that the old system relied on to generate profit. The SWIFT system was only a messaging service. The actual transfer and settlement of funds required multiple correspondent banks, involving high fees and often taking 3 to 5 business days.
And that inefficiency was a profit engine for Wall Street.
A massive, reliable profit engine for giants like JP Morgan and Citi. mBridge transactions, using DLT, settle in seconds. They're instantaneous and final, and at a near-zero cost.
Okay, can you explain how DLT achieves that speed and security compared to the old system?
Sure. DLT provides 3 critical advantages for central banks. First is instant finality. When the transaction is recorded on the shared ledger, the payment is final. There's no waiting for reconciliation across multiple intermediary banks. Second is immutability and transparency among the participants. The shared ledger is cryptographically secured, making it almost impossible to tamper with, which is crucial for sovereign risk management.
And third, which sounds like the most important,
the peer-to-peer structure. Instead of routing through New York, the Chinese central bank can transact directly with the Saudi central bank. This efficiency just fundamentally destroys the old profit model. Why would a nation pay a 3% fee and wait 3 days if they can settle instantly and securely for free?
The involvement of Saudi Arabia in mBridge is the geopolitical linchpin here, signaling the beginning of the end for the petrodollar system. For 50 years, that bargain required Saudi Arabia to sell oil exclusively in U.S. dollars and recycle those dollars back into U.S. Treasury debt.
Saudi Arabia's full participation in mBridge is a foundational structural shift. mBridge provides the necessary technological infrastructure for Saudi Arabia to accept and transact in other sovereign currencies at scale, most immediately the digital yuan.
And the implications for U.S. strategic hegemony are profound.
Because this enables the creation of an entirely self-sufficient, closed-loop economy that completely bypasses and disintermediates the United States.
Describe that closed-loop transaction in detail for us.
In the closed loop, China purchases oil and pays Saudi Arabia in digital yuan. Because mBridge facilitates instant digital settlement, Saudi Arabia instantly possesses a usable, convertible asset digital yuan, which can immediately use to purchase necessary goods like solar panels, weapons, or construction materials from China.
So the entire transaction, oil for goods, happens without ever touching the dollar.
Exactly. The U.S. dollar, U.S. intermediary banks, and the U.S. government are entirely deleted from the equation. The toll booth is gone.
And if the U.S. government can't track or monitor the transaction on this decentralized ledger, the core power of financial sanctions is effectively neutralized.
That is the ultimate strategic consequence. Trade conducted on mBridge is encrypted and visible only to the central bank participants. The Federal Reserve can't see it, the Treasury can't track it, the CIA can't intercept it. Washington goes from being the global financial policeman, seeing all the flows, to being a global bystander.
This creates a sanction-free zone.
A functional, technologically enforced sanction-free zone that covers a massive growing portion of the global economy. This allows major geopolitical players, including the axis of resistance and countries throughout the global south, to trade without fear of Western interference, asset confiscation, or political blackmail.
So let's tie this back to the U.S.
Right.
What is the immediate, tangible relevance of this quiet financial reset for the U.S. economy and for the American standard of living?
The U.S. is losing what has long been called its exorbitant privilege. For decades, the U.S. could print dollars and run massive trade and budget deficits because the global economy needed those dollars to trade.
Which created an artificial guaranteed demand for U.S. debt.
For Treasury bonds, yes, which funded everything from the military to domestic projects. As global trade conducted in dollars shrinks because of mBridge and other alternatives, the automatic demand for U.S. debt shrinks with it.
And if countries like Saudi Arabia stop recycling their oil profits back into treasuries at scale, the funding mechanism for the American system starts to wobble.
Precisely. The question becomes existential. Who funds the enormous U.S. military and its global footprint? Who funds the massive U.S. deficit, which is currently climbing toward an unprecedented $38 trillion?
The debt-to-GDP ratio is already well over 125%.
A level traditionally associated with economic instability. As the global demand for the dollar decreases, the U.S. government must pay higher interest rates to attract buyers for its debt. That directly raises the cost of borrowing for everyone in the U.S. and could potentially trigger a profound economic reckoning.
It sounds like a structural reckoning is coming. A financial system based on an archaic, weaponized structure is being challenged by a superior technology.
It is the Napster moment of the U.S. dollar. The old, centralized system, bloated, slow, and expensive, is being technologically disrupted by a superior, decentralized, politically neutral alternative.
So the world is splitting.
Into two distinct financial hemispheres. One centralized, dollar-based, and weaponized by Washington. The other multi-currency, decentralized, and built on instantaneous digital ledgers. While the dollar won't vanish overnight, the monopoly that built the American empire is broken. Its power to enforce foreign policy through unilateral financial control is rapidly evaporating, ushering in a multipolar financial world.
So to summarize, we've analyzed these complex, interconnected threads.
The tactical military acceleration and the grinding war of attrition in Ukraine, and the corresponding threat of hybrid warfare blowback against Western suppliers.
We've looked at the internal political intrigue linking massive, decades-long scandals, alleged blackmail operations, and foreign intelligence to the highest levels of U.S. power.
We've covered the systematic corruption of capitalism that prioritizes the trillion-dollar war machine and profit over human need and ecological necessity.
And finally, this quiet, technologically driven revolution in global finance that has functionally neutralized the U.S. dollar monopoly.
All of these disparate events point towards a singular, inescapable conclusion. A world rapidly fragmenting away from the previous U.S.-centric unipolar order.
You now have the necessary context to navigate these complex, interlocking events, seeing not just the individual headlines, but the systemic, historical forces driving them. The age of certainty, where the U.S. dollar and U.S. intelligence apparatus held unquestioned global power, is clearly over.
We've seen accounts suggesting that high-profile figures are being targeted and that the U.S. has lost the monopoly on global financial transactions. If the power of the U.S. empire was built on the dollar's dominance and the ability to control information, and both are now demonstrably threatened or compromised by technology and geopolitics, how long will it be until the crushing domestic consequences of that weakening global power, such as the massive internal crises of debt, pervasive inequality, and crumbling infrastructure, become the only story left to tell?